everybody. Sorry about the slight delay. We've got a true hybrid working going on here when we have a group of people online, group of people in person as well, and obviously usual kind of tech issues going on. So nice to see things have progressed since we all got the pandemic. My name is Gemma Wright. I'm one of the early career researchers working on the SCAF project. SCAF, if you don't know already, is the Scottish Alliance for Food, and our presentation today, which I'll come on to in a minute, is by David Thomson, which is going to look at how us as early careers professionals can influence the food system. But before we get onto that, it's going to be myself co-chairing the session with Ben, hello, and then we'll pass over to David afterwards. So feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat if you want. Obviously, one of the big things that we're trying to do here at SCAF is to build networks and collaborations. So if you can introduce yourself, where you're from, and what your kind of area of work is, and then it might help you connect with other people, which is going to be probably a bit of a theme from today, I would say. So as I said, we are the Scottish Alliance for Food, and the aim is to bring together people from a wide variety of different backgrounds, from research to practice, to try and understand the issues we have and the complexity of our food system. We have an aim of looking at creating a better food future for all, and look at improving health, sustainability and equity within food systems. So what our vision and values are: we're a cross-disciplinary community, that we have a deep understanding of the challenges that face us within the food system. And the aim of us being here and the activities that we do is to come together to try and solve some of the research challenges and to provide much needed transformation in the Scottish food landscape. So we're trying to be evidence-based, inclusive, and very much collaborative as well. So it's started off with a group of 10 different institutions across Scotland who put in a bid to the Scottish Funding Council to look at creating the collaboration, and obviously we were successful. And our activities kind of continue what we said we were going to do within this initial grant. And one of those things was to look at kind of creating collaborations and education around the food system. We have 4 main themes, which are mapping the food system, innovation-led food system research, culture, heritage and behaviour, and food security, environment and community. And we have 2 cross-cutting work streams, which are the food system and our Academy of Citizens as well. So basically, we're trying to go full sledgehammer into the food system to try and make some changes in an area which has been very difficult to change historically. And I think by working together, one of our aims is hoping that we can achieve this better as a group than we can as individuals. So we have a series of things, like I was saying, of opportunities and events that we try and arrange to try and achieve our goals. Obviously, I'm coming at this from the kind of early career side. So we are trying to foster a positive research culture for early career researchers and also those not within academia and research. I think that's really important to get that across. Because if we just stick within academia, then we're going to be in the same situation that we are currently in 6 years' time. So we offer things like financial support, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end, and other kind of opportunities, including this webinar, to try and achieve our goals. So that is a flying tour of what SCAF does. There's a QR code at the bottom there, or you can just Google us to look up a bit more about what we do on our website. And as for the event today, if you want to provide some feedback and information on the webinar today, and even just your thoughts and ideas about how us as early careers can influence the food system, then we would be very grateful and be really interested to hear your thoughts on that. So now I'm going to hand over to our guest speaker today. I'm very delighted to have David along with us, who is going to hopefully talk to us about early career professionals and how we, maybe when we're feeling that we can't control much and we're working on one specific project or we're paid to do one job, how do we kind of try and influence this massive thing called the food system? So, Laura, you're able to, actually, no, David, you can just stop, if you stop sharing.
So, David, you can just
share the screen.
Share. There we go. Thanks, Gemma. Yeah, I've been asked today to speak a little bit about how can early career professionals influence the food system. And I will talk a little bit about my experience of working with researchers and others in my career. Hopefully there'll be some interesting tidbits there and some interesting stories, but also we'll have the opportunity at the end of the presentation for a discussion. Good luck to Gemma and Ben in managing a hybrid discussion, which are always difficult things to do. Firstly, if my slides start working, there we go. Who am I? I'm David Thomson. Currently I'm in the bottom job as the Chief Executive of the Food and Drink Federation Scotland. But before that, for 17 years, I was a Scottish Government civil servant. And I was a jobbing civil servant. I have no particular expertise in any area when I joined the civil service. I've got a degree in Scottish history and ethnology. So I worked my way through the government, but my last two jobs in government were pretty important to this agenda, I think. The first was as head of the Food, Drink and Rural Communities Division. So I was responsible for the design and the delivery over several years of Recipe for Success, which was the Scottish Government's first ever food and drink policy and was the precursor to Good Food Nation. In fact, I think Recipe for Success uses the words Good Food Nation in it. As I was also responsible for rural communities work, including the Scottish Land Commission, Scottish Rural Parliament, and a range of land fund grants as well. So I did 6 years at that. So a long time, not just dreaming up things, but also then being responsible for delivery. And if you ever get the chance, please remember to dream up things and never be responsible for delivery, because then you work out what works and what doesn't work. My last job in the Scottish Government was head of primary care, and I mentioned that for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's an enormous amount of money involved in that. I was responsible for negotiating the general practitioner contract, government's liaison with the ambulance service and with NHS 24, which is the telephone line. And all of these were really being reshaped and refocused at the time to focus their services on the greatest need, and that includes non-communicable diseases, and in particular multi-morbidity, a lot of which are the diseases that are also associated with obesity. And then 9 years ago, I left the Scottish Government and I joined the Food and Drink Federation. And here I'm doing a similar job to being a civil servant. So I'm a bureaucrat for a different set of masters. So in this case, food and drink businesses who are paying a membership to Food and Drink Federation Scotland. So we represent those businesses on policy and legislative change, making sure the voice of industry is heard, in particular where policy and legislation has an impact on industry, and of course supporting those businesses when legislative change happens and they need to implement elements of that. So that's 15 years worth of my career, more than that now, with some involvement directly in the agenda of food and drink. And why is that important? So why is food and drink important? And I'll talk here, this slide is an FDF Scotland slide, and it shows the business impact of food and drink in Scotland. And I wanted to make sure that that was front and centre, because I'll spend a lot of the rest of the time talking a little bit about business, but also about other areas where people can influence. Two things that I'd pick out, particularly from this slide. The first is in the top right, where you'll see exports. They did decrease last year, but that was because whisky had a bumper year the year before. But essentially what we're talking about in that £7.6 billion is a third of the UK's total exports in food and drink coming from Scotland. That's led by whisky, it's led by salmon and seafood, but exporting from Scotland is a significant part of the UK food and drink export economy. And then in the bottom right, in Scotland, and actually this is across the whole of the UK, 96% of food and drink manufacturers are small and medium-sized enterprises. And I'll return to that theme a couple of times during the rest of the presentation. But in essence, food and drink manufacturing has a significant economic impact. So the food system. Now, this is a slide I sometimes pull out when I want to explain the food system to people. Now, in your jobs and your careers, you will see elements of it. But the flow of the slide is to show, I think, some of the interesting way that I try and think about things. So obviously you've got the Food and Agriculture Organization, which has already a very long paragraph that describes the food system. And in fact, they go and have an even longer paragraph underneath that to describe a sustainable food system. You've got the University of Oxford, which cuts that down a little bit to some simpler language. But my favorite, I think, is City University, which is characterized as the activities that take food from farm to flush. And I want to talk about how you cut that down and how you simplify that, because actually that's one of the key themes that I'll be talking about today, which is about simplification of message, which is really, really important in terms of influencing. So we know from those two slides on both the economy and those wider range of elements that define a food system, that it plays a critical role in public health, in obesity and other things that I've already talked about, in environmental sustainability, whether that's in net zero, biodiversity, water usage, deforestation, and of course in the economic stability of individual businesses, of course, but actually in the jobs, roles and careers that are created for the people of the nation. So where is it that you can fit in as an early career professional? Well, I think there's obvious things there. There are fresh perspectives online and in the room. There's innovative thinking as you think about things from different angles. There's adaptability, the ability to challenge yourself as well as challenge others. And I think, given the careers that you've chosen, definitively there's a desire to see positive change there. So there's a lot that you have to offer. And in particular, it's important to bring yourself. What you'll find in what I'm talking about is there's a lot here where it's about individuals and groups bringing themselves forwards and being clear about what they can offer and participating in wider networking and opportunities, because I think those are critical, and particularly in a country as small as Scotland. And as you see from my career, that's mostly been based in Scotland, though I'm part of a UK organisation. And I think really the opportunity to think about it in this way, which is a lot of the people that you're working with now, people like myself, I've been involved for 15 years, they tend to stick around. And the relationships that you build in the early point in your career are very, very likely to be to stick and become more and more influential as you move through your career and you move through your roles. So I want to talk in a little bit more detail about these 5 areas of influence that I see in the food and drink sphere in Scotland, and I'll talk a little bit about the kinds of areas that you can influence, and then I will talk a little bit about some of my experience in being influenced and seeking influence in those areas, and I hope those are kind of helpful little snippets into the world that I work in. So first off is economy and business. Now, I've already talked about the makeup of the industry. So when you're talking about the food industry, I think lots of people think of it as a monolithic entity, a small number of very large companies, and there is some truth in that. But actually, as I said in my first slide, there's something like 1,300 small and medium-sized businesses in Scotland that are involved in food manufacture, and 96% of them are small and medium-sized enterprises. So actually, engaging with businesses is really, really important, but it's really difficult because those small and medium-sized enterprises have very limited people resource, and it's quite often the managing director or the technical director, if they even have those two roles, who is thinking about everything. And that comes from as simple as the person making sure that their sales go out the door, that their lorries turn up on time, that their machines are working to produce their food, that the people have turned up to work for them, and whether they're going to have enough money at the end of the week to pay people's wages. And so being clear, I think, about where you can add the opportunity to support those people, and in particular how you can save them money, is really important in engaging the vast majority of businesses in Scotland. But as you can see from the slide, there's lots of areas where there are absolutely gains to be made. So whether that's in sustainable agricultural practice, as many of you will know, alternative proteins, waste reduction technologies, these are just some of the key areas where businesses are looking for support. I mentioned net zero already, so eco-friendly products, sustainable supply chain is critical. And more, we're seeing pressure from customers on businesses in the supply chain to drive net zero much more strongly, and to do so in a way that's much more significantly reported upon. So all of that means there's huge opportunities, and businesses are looking for solutions in these areas, as well as, of course, reformulation and new product opportunities. And my colleague Joanne Burns was part of the SCAF conference yesterday, so I hope you took the opportunity to speak with her. And of course, there are entrepreneurial opportunities. Everyone likes a new idea, and there are lots and lots of people hungry to support new ideas. There are multiple crowdfunding and investor summits around new ideas in food and drink every year in Scotland. So finding ways to unleash yourself as an entrepreneur is also one of the interesting possibilities. So what does that mean in practice? So I've talked a little bit about the Reformulate Partnership, which my colleague Joanne does. So what have we done to get early career professionals and others together? Well, we've done that in a number of ways. So we worked with academics on projects, and we've done that with support from Interface, who've linked up projects, companies, and individuals. We have placed students and researchers in businesses to solve their reformulation issues and to help run programs for them. And obviously, we work actively with businesses on reformulation and fortification with different sets of ingredients. And this agenda is incredibly important to the food and drink industry at the moment. Across the UK, we've been working with our members, and it's very clear that there are hundreds of millions of pounds every year being used on innovation for reformulation. So there is absolutely a role in that space for early career researchers, and we can work with you to provide those opportunities. So that's a very clear practical area where work can go on, but there's a whole range of businesses in Scotland and opportunity in Scotland, either through academic partnerships like the International Barley Hub, to programs like the one that we run at FDF Scotland. So the second area I want to talk a little bit about is policy and legislation, and this, of course, is the world that I work in and came from. Obviously, influencing policy through research is important to inform regulations, taxes, food standards. We work incredibly regularly with the Food Standards Agency and Food Standards Scotland on a wide range of pieces of research and risk analysis that have direct impact on the food and drink industry. The most recent one is around mycotoxins and maximum residue levels for mycotoxins in oats, which is one of my now specialist subjects that I didn't think I would ever have to be a specialist in, but also informing regulations. So the most famous example of that in food and drink recently is the work that was done to inform the minimum unit pricing of alcohol done by the University of Sheffield, but directly informs Scottish Government regulation, and in fact the revision of that regulation in the last year or so. So there's a huge amount of that work goes on in the background, and I would encourage more of that. There's a whole range, obviously, as a number of you will know, of Scottish Government supported research through the Safari Partnership, so organisations like the James Hutton Institute and the Rout Institute of Nutrition and Health all of which are directly directed by government through the funding and also through engagement with policymakers. And that active engagement with policymakers is critical, I think. You need to ensure your research findings are known and understood. And the best way to do that is to find ways to actively engage with policymakers. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But I would also say there's lots of great policy forums in Scotland. SCAF is a great new initiative, which I'm delighted to see. There's also the cross-party group on food in the Scottish Parliament, which is open to anyone to attend. And there are a whole range of those types of fora. And I would encourage you to get involved. It might seem as an early career researcher you don't have a lot to offer. I assure you do, but also in terms of building relationships and building understanding, these are great opportunities for you to do so. So I want to talk a little bit about how policy has how policy and research have come together. The picture is one of Alex Salmond from the Daily Mail. He's looking at a Tunnocks tea cake, I think, at the time, in the always glorious headgear that you get when you visit a food and drink factory. And it's even worse if you have a beard like me, because you have to wear a beard snoot too. So in 2008, when we were coming up with the Recipe for Success, the first National Scottish Food and Drink Policy, Alex Salmond had the bumper idea that he would eat only Scottish food for a week. And that was a massively interesting PR stunt. But of course, as a policy official, you then get asked, well, how does he do that? How are you going to arrange and manage that? And we had a really difficult time managing that because of the diary of the First Minister was incredibly difficult. So we reached out to the Rowett Institute for Nutrition and Health for some support. And the first thing they said to us was, well, of course, because everyone's diet is individual, we'll need to do an analysis of the First Minister. Could you send them to us to weigh him? If anyone has ever seen Alex Salmond, then they will know that the First Minister was not likely to wish to go and to be weighed at that time. And that illustrates, I think, a little an interesting thing where there's an opportunity, there's a way to work, there's a great PR opportunity. But where you get that is the integration with what the policymaker needs and what the researcher is able to do or willing to do, or is able or willing to understand the situation, are two different things. And I think it's really important, and that's why I'll come back again about trying to understand the context in which you're operating. But of course, that's a flippant example. When we were developing the food and drink policy, we had the great Professor Maggie Gill supporting us in the government at that time. And what she did was she pulled together a couple of things. So she pulled together high-level academic engagement. So we had a number of discussion sessions where we talked about the food and drink policy as a whole, policymaker to academic, and we talked around the different ideas and where the strengths and weaknesses might be in it. And as we developed the policy, we had a whole range of stakeholder fora, during which engagement with academics and researchers was in all parts of the different elements, and that covered business and industry, it covered the environment, it covered health, it covered education, and it covered public procurement. So we were able, in that case, to use that as part of the broader discussion on food and drink. And I think if I've got a kind of comment, I think, on where the Scottish government now is on Good Food Nation, I think there's room for a lot more of that in the way that they participate and drive things forward. But that helped, all that academic discussion and policy discussion helped to formulate what we would have in Recipe for Success and helped to set very clear parameters for the work that we were doing. And that active and ongoing engagement that I had as a policymaker with a range of institutions, from universities to the research institutes, was very critical in the way that we developed the policy from then. So consumer and public sentiment is, of course, another area where academics are quite often engaged. The big debate of the day is on ultra-processed foods, as I'm sure you'll be aware, and there is no shortage of academics, pseudo-academics, researchers, and others who are talking about ultra-processed food and its purported impact on people. So what's important here is, of course, effective communication of research. And the key thing there is using accessible language. Whether you like or do not like the debate about ultra-processed food, what you have is, other than the term ultra-processed food itself, a very clear set of ways of discussing anything you want around food policy, in fact, using the media term of the moment. And so having a think really about what the environment is in terms of the media and food and drink at the moment is an important way to think about that. And obviously there are different ways that you can publicly engage and educate. As FDF Scotland, and in particular with our Reformulate programme, we've had a number of broad discussion sections that have included academics, stakeholders, and businesses together, raising the issues around reformulation. And there's lots of opportunity for a wider range of that, I think, as we go forward. But the important thing is that whatever you create speaks to people, and it has to speak to people simply. So a policymaker's needs are very different from a business's needs, and are very different from another academic's needs in terms of what you're talking about. And I think if there's one thing that goes across all the categories is that think about who you're talking to. Because the best way to engage and influence is to use their language back to them. And if I had £10 for every time an academic said to me, I will simplify this to make sure you understand, then I would be quite a rich man and no happier. Because make sure you're talking directly to people rather than necessarily talking down to them. So how does that work in terms of government? So another job that I had in my early career in government was being a minister's private secretary, which means that as a minister's private secretary, you need to make sure that the minister is in the right place at the right time with what used to be called the right piece of paper. I guess it's the right file on their phone these days. But essentially reacting to press stories, and being aware of what was happening and making sure the minister had the opportunity to engage with the media during their day was part of that job. And what that means is, it's very clear that almost every day there's a news story about food and drink. So the real importance there is, whether chocolate is good or bad for you, whether red wine is good or bad for you, and that changes from day to day. So it's very difficult to have any engagement there, but the media, in terms of the traditional press, is always interested in some new research project that has something to say, in particular about health and diet. But also, I would say there's also local press. So there's a thriving local press industry who are very hungry for local stories across the whole of the UK and in particular in Scotland. And also with food and drink, it being such a large industry, there's a whole range of trade press, like Food Manufacturer Magazine, The Grocer, and others, all of which are always looking for content. And you may feel that you've got the right story for them. Again, thinking about who it is you're trying to engage and how you do it. And also on social media, in my current job, social media was not as big a deal when I was a private secretary, but in my current job, monitoring social media, understanding what people are talking about, engaging if we feel that it's appropriate to do so is a very significant use. And I think thinking about how you use social media, and obviously you need to be careful about that, but and the different platforms is important. I would have said up until last year that Twitter or X was the best way to engage politically. I would say that that is fading rapidly as the signal gets lost in the noise around Twitter. For a business-to-business perspective, LinkedIn is quite often the most important way to do things. So there's a whole range of different things, and I think that social media environment is evolving quite significantly at the moment. So thinking about how you engage with that in again, a clear and simple way is really, really important. And I've had news stories, in particular when I was in health, that absolutely change what you're doing as policy, and absolutely change what you're doing that day significantly. And I remember when I was in food and drink. Some of you may be old enough to remember this, but there was a significant pick up on a school meal story, which a little girl had kind of taken a picture of her school meal, and her dad had then used that to promote the awfulness of school meals in Scotland, which took the Scottish government by massive surprise, because they had actually done a lot in terms of supporting school meal nutrition standards in Scotland, and it became a viral story. It went all over the world, and the Scottish government had multiple instances of people writing in to complain about the state of Scottish school meals from Sweden, from the US, from Italy, from all around the world. Thankfully, that was done by the school meals team, but that absolutely changed a couple of things. It changed their entire next 2 months as they were engaged in trying to defend the school meal nutrition standards and the actions of the particular council that had put those meals out, as well as, of course, driving inquiries into the delivery of the school meal and nutrition standards, whether they needed to be updated, was the funding right, a whole range of different things. So that's one clear example, and there are many others of where social media, which was then picked up by the traditional media, has absolutely driven policy and change, not necessarily for the right reasons or in the right way, but it does happen. Activism and intellectual discourse is the fourth area. Scottish Alliance for Food is maybe part of that, but there are other great other advocates for food in Scotland, including a wide range of non-governmental organisations like Nourish Scotland and others. And there are multiple opportunities to participate in public discussion, where that's engaging in activism and debate, challenging the norms, proposing new ideas, writing opinion pieces, or engaging again over social or conventional media, but also working with NGOs, think tanks and advocacy groups to amplify your research and to contribute to their broader goals. So, if you're not already participating, I guess if you're here today, you are participating in a way, but find the ways to do that, because it's thriving at the moment. There's a real hunger, and there's a real opportunity. And again, it does influence. This is Nourish Scotland's image, but it's the campaign for a good food nation. And we would not have a Good Food Nation Act in Scotland without the advocacy of NGOs and others in this space. The Scottish government had announced it and then kind of deplatformed it a little bit. And if it was not for advocacy and action and people coming together and saying, no, what we need is a Good Food Nation Act, we would absolutely not have one right now. I'll go on to talk a little bit about what that means. But that was a very, very clear, very, very active and very, very current example of advocacy actually making a difference in terms of policy and legislation. And you will, and it was the people behind those organisations that drove that over a number of years, talking directly amongst themselves and directly to politicians, that made sure that even if the Scottish government were a little bit uncomfortable about bringing the act forward that they promised, every other politician in the Scottish Parliament supported it pretty much. So the last element I want to talk about is public sector delivery, and I've talked already about the example of school meals, where I think there's a great nutritional standards, but there's a lot to do about providing products that are that kids want to eat and that meet those standards. Food assistance in terms of social foods, so food banks and a whole range of other things, as well as in terms of disabled people and older people who need food assistance. which they get from either the public sector or the third sector, quite often on a contract to the public sector. And again, in particular, nutrition for older people is a kind of under-researched area where we're going to need a lot more work in the future, and a lot more of that work to translate into products that support people with particular dietary needs. And public sector procurement, where again, how much food that we procure from the UK, from Scotland in our public sector is always a matter for debate, and that devolves into three specific areas. How can we define the types of food we need? Is it available? And how much are we willing to pay for it? And all these are key issues where research, understanding and drive are really important. And in Good Food Nation, as I've talked about, that is now a piece of legislation. The Scottish Government has consulted on the Good Food Nation plan, and that's due to be published before the end of the year. And following that, all of the obligated local authorities and health boards will need to produce their own plans. And there is a huge amount where those organisations will need a significant amount of help. We're involved with a number of clusters of local authorities on the business side of things, but actually in everything, there's a lot of people who are coming up with a lot of plans over the next couple of years, and they will need help. Find out who needs it in your local area and offer them some help to see if they can do anything there. Because the great thing about the Good Food Nation is that it covers every geographical area. So wherever you are, somebody will be responsible for delivering a local Good Food Nation plan. You should take that opportunity. It's at the moment, over the next year or two, it's an unprecedented opportunity to influence locally as well as nationally. So there's a really good opportunity there, I think. So, 3 things to take away. All of you on this call have a vital role to play in the future of the food system. And I hope I've shown you there are many ways to do so, with a little bit of illustration about how some of that has impacted my career. Engagement across the economy, policy, public sentiment, activism, and improving services. All of these can drive meaningful change. And really, one thing that I always say is you are the guys who have set out to have your career in food and drink and academia. And it's really up to you. You're going to be the people who are responsible for creating a more sustainable, equitable, and healthy global food system. So I hope that you take that opportunity. And Gemma, Ben, I think that has me come to the end of what I was going to say.